Hello everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Al Stam and I'm the president of Hillsdale Praxis, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing tonight's speaker. Dr. Michael D. Ryle is known for his research in the field of strategic management, especially for his pioneering work in the theory of value capture and business strategy. Throughout his career, he's maintained a strong interest in exploring the nature of human learning in complex, interactive, and dynamic systems. He presently holds the position of Professor of Management at Florida Atlantic University and is Director of Policy at the Madden Center for Value Creation. Dr. Ryle's research has been published in prestigious scholarly journals, including the Strategic Management Journal, Management Science, and the Academy of Management Review, among others. His research is diverse, extending into economics, game theory, causal inference, AI, and philosophy. He has a demonstrated record of success funding acquisition from highly regarded funding bodies, such as the AP Sloan Foundation, the Australian Research Council, and the Humanities Research Council of Canada. As an educator, Dr. Ryle has taught a wide range of courses, including core business strategy, advanced strategy, business ethics, and game theory. He has taught at various academic levels, including undergraduate, MBA, master's, and PhD, as well as executive programs. His teaching skills have earned him recognition and awards from students and peers alike. Dr. Ryle has also contributed to the scholarly community through various editorial roles at leading academic journals. Additionally, he co-founded 2 academic organizations and has organized numerous scholarly conferences and symposia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryle.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, so after that, I have to say that, share something with you guys. I've given talks, I've been around, so the reason that was so long is just because I've been doing this for so long. So after some time, you get all that stuff. But I've given talks at Harvard, Stanford, University of Chicago, places like that. And I got the call from Al, and I said to my wife, I said, oh, guess what? I just got invited to give a talk at Hillsdale. And she said, so finally something that impresses me. so we're both huge Hillsdale fans. So I'm going to give a talk on Get Woke, Go Broke. The key, in this title, there are sort of 2 key things. One is the question mark at the end of that, and the other is the word equilibrium. And I don't have a lot of time, and I want to cover a lot of ground, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I want to give you some motivation. There's been something that I've been puzzled by, and I have these sort of ongoing discussions with my Austrian economics colleagues and libertarians. The intersection of those 2 sets seems to be pretty thick about the ability of markets to sort of correct problems. So the observation is one, as someone who's been doing this business for 25 years, not quite 30, is that higher education is increasingly not doing a very good job of educating people. And there are some huge exceptions. I would put Hillsdale in the huge exception category. But other places, higher education is increasingly problematic. And we're seeing managers, so I teach at a business school, I teach MBA students, executives and stuff like that, where we're seeing this sort of behavior that seems puzzling. Managers who seem to almost be intentionally destroying value in their companies. And this is puzzling. So the question that I've been thinking about is, well, why is this happening? And not only why is this happening, but why does it seem to be a persistent, continuing? So let me give you just some anecdotal evidence. So I'm trained as a game theorist, so I'm not really, I don't do a lot of empirical work. So this is anecdotal, but it's still something that we're seeing a lot more of. So these are headlines. So I've been thinking about this, and every now and then I'll clip an article. Is Harvard turning into a huge joke? Harvard Law School Journal requires race, sexual orientation to submit articles. National test results underscore declining knowledge of US history and civics and so on. Academia is adrift in a sea of low standards. So these are, this isn't data, but it's sort of anecdotal indications that we're seeing more and more of these sorts of articles being written about the problems in higher education. There is some evidence, but it's a little bit hard to come by. So, things like 72% of young adults with degrees believe that college didn't equip them for their jobs. There was this study by Arum and Roxa in 2011. They find that 45% of students show no significant gains in learning from the time that they, measured at the beginning of college, at the end of college. And important for this talk also is that most people seem to be influenced by their parents in terms of whether or not they're going to even go to college. So that'll come up again later. So, education, and as someone that has been teaching for a long time, I've definitely seen this decline in the places where I've worked. And I had this discussion, at the American Institute for Economic Research, where Al and I met each other, I was talking about these things, and there was a young undergraduate there who said, yeah, but isn't it just the case that older generation always thinks that younger generation is sort of not as good and not doing as good? Isn't that just what's happening? And I said, no, actually, it's definitely gotten worse. There's no question in my mind about it. So this is kind of a question. Why? Because there are places like Hillsdale, right? So there are places that are giving serious education. And if you're a believer in markets and think that markets, work, then what you're going to think is, well, yeah, Harvard can become a big joke. They can stop educating people, and eventually people are going to stop going there, and recruiters and students and everyone are going to come to places like Hillsdale. Or either that or the competition will force Harvard to sort of get serious about their education. Then we have these sort of headlines from the business world. Everybody's familiar with the Bud Light problem. And we've got this whole DEI, ESG thing going on. I assume everybody know what ESG is pretty much. This is environmental, social, and governance. This is basically, social credit scoring for firms is sort of what it amounts to. So it's, paying attention to things that are not profit, right? So we're going to do things that are sustainable and have all these programs that are, inclusive and so on. And they're not really profit focused. And in some cases, it seems that making companies or having companies focus on these things actually destroys shareholder value, actually destroys it. Now, it's hard to find. So there is some, again, anecdotal evidence. We saw the Bud Light, Target, North Face fiascos. They lost $25 billion in market cap since May. And Disney, another sort of canonical case, has lost about $1 billion on their last several theatrical releases. So these companies are doing things that are causing the destruction of shareholder value. And everybody's sort of doing this ESG stuff, and it's very hard to get any sort of solid analysis in terms of scholarship and what's going on. So these ESG performance findings, they're all over the map if you read the scholarship in the area. There's people saying, oh, ESG is fantastic, it's helping companies be more profitable. Other people are saying it's a disaster, it's destroying value. It's very hard to know if you read a scholarly paper what the definitions even are. So they're talking about sustainability and governance and other things, and it's not clear what the terms are. It's not clear what they're supposed to be doing. It doesn't seem to be measured. So it's just very hard to tell what's going on. And yet there's tons of money being dumped into these programs by firms. It's a huge amounts of money being put into these ESG programs. So the question is just sort of what in the world is going on? And not only are they losing shareholder value, but if you're a believer in markets, right? If you're like, well, no, markets come along and they're going to fix the problem, and if managers are wasting money and have these programs, and the productive firms are going to eventually take their market share and put them out of business. But the thing is, these firms double down on this stuff. So it's not like they're learning any lessons. So this is Bud Light, funding this. Given Bud Light's customers' reaction to Dylan Mulvaney earlier in the year, you would think that Bud Light would not be funding these sort of LGBTQ type things, but they've just gone on right ahead, right? They just keep going. Here's Disney. So Crater apparently was on Disney Plus. They invested $50 million into this series, and they shut it down after 7 days. I thought, well, why is that? And I looked up a review, and the review said, Crater is a surprisingly charming, albeit generic, young audience film with some hard-hitting themes on capitalism and classicism. So, it's just what young people want when they're watching a sci-fi, is to get a hard-hitting lesson on how bad capitalism is. But the thing is that they just keep doing it. So Kathleen Kennedy, who's, last I looked, she was the president of Lucasfilms, has just been destroying value all over the place. She wants to lecture people. She's decided, 2 weeks ago, she was saying we're going to change we're dumping all the Star Wars universe, and we're going to go into a new universe with, important current messages for people. And, Disney's getting killed, but they just keep doing it. And this is the puzzle, right, is why do they keep doing it when the market's saying this is a disaster? And why aren't they, getting replaced by someone else? Now, we also have Peter Turchin's book. I don't know if any of you have seen this book or read this book. It's a very interesting book. He just came out with it. So Turchin is a historian, and his book is End Times. And he brings this, this sort of predator-prey model into the service of thinking about these trends and cycles that we see in history. So basically, you guys probably know these predator-prey models. So the typical one is there's a population of sheep and a population of wolves. And at first there are lots of sheep, and then the wolves start eating the sheep, and then the wolf population explodes, but then the sheep are all eaten, and so the wolves start starving, and so the wolf population goes down, and then the sheep population goes up, and so you have these cycles in the thing. And there are nice mathematical models about this, so he's very happy that he's doing mathematical models. And basically, his story is the following. You start with a society that's socially cohesive, productive, everybody's getting along, but then these rent-seeking elites decide and figure out how to tweak things up so that they can start taking money from the non-elites. And he calls this the money pump. So they figure out a way to get a money pump from the non-elites into the elites. And this causes what he calls non-elite immiseration. So people start getting poorer. They start, having these elites driving around and, living in penthouses in New York and so forth. And of course, that's very attractive to people. And just like the wolf population, pretty soon there are too many elites. So he calls this elite overproduction. Well, if you're an elite and you don't have a job doing whatever it is that elites do, then you become a disenfranchised elite. And you've got these immiserated population, people that are basically very angry at the way things are going, and the disenfranchised elites become revolutionaries. They lead the non-elites, the immiserated non-elites, into some sort of a revolutionary behavior, and you get social disintegration. And so he sees this as what happens. And it's an interesting book, because he has lots of examples of this happening throughout history, Rome being sort of a key one, but there are lots of examples of this. France, all of these revolutions, Russia, and so forth. Now, the problem as an economist that I have with this view is that it is this sort of Marxian view that history is just a very mechanical thing that happens. So there's a sort of, there's just this arc of history. There's no room, and he's very explicit about this, no room for individual human agency. So it's sort of, there's a group of elites, and they behave like elites, and there's a group of non-elites, and they behave like non-elites. But then there's something even sort of more off about this, in the sense that elites and non-elites are not sheeps and wolves. They're complements. So if you want to do something productive, you need people to work in firms, and you need someone to manage the firms. You need coordinators and planners. And so it seems like, economically speaking, these people are not necessarily at odds with each other. They should be economic complements. And so this story, while it's interesting, and it certainly seems to describe, these cycles where the elites eventually somehow get turned against the non-elite population and things fall apart. But as an economist, you're sort of going, well, I don't know, like why would that happen? It's not obvious that that would be something that would need to happen. And then finally, why are markets not correcting these inefficiencies, or don't seem to be correcting these inefficiencies? So this sets the groundwork for the question that I'm trying to get my arms around. Now, I should tell you that there are two things that I don't usually do. So there are two models here in this paper. One is a macro model, and one is a equilibrium model. I'm trained as a game theorist, so I don't normally do these things, but they seem like the right tools to use. And I hope I can convince you that they are and why they are. So I want to pick up on these themes. And I want to say, well, suppose that what's going on is that if you're an elite parent, so you're in the elite, one of the things that seems to be very important to elite parents is that their kids also become members of the elite. And we've heard about helicopter parents and bulldozer parents. They keep getting more and more intrusive into what's going on and making sure that their kids get into the elite. So let's assume that's a thing that's going on. Let's also assume that the way that you become a member of the elite, or that you're certified into the elite, is with your college education. So going to university is important, but what we're going to assume going forward is that really what's going on, again, happy to stipulate that Hillsdale is not offering this kind of service, but let's assume that what Harvard's really doing is being a finishing school. So as a student at Harvard, you're learning the norms, language, viewpoint of the elite, and then you get certified as the elite, and out you go into the elite. The problem, of course, is that you're not really told how to analyze anything or do any critical thinking. So productive knowledge isn't the thing. So we're going to go forward with the idea that universities are there to sort of certify people into the elite, and that they're not really learning anything. And then they go into management without having learned anything, and they're sort of incompetent, and they're going to burn shareholder value. Why do they burn shareholder value? Well, one way is just signaling that they're part of the elite. So we do, the stuff that we see at Target and Bud Light and so forth. I can blow a bunch of shareholder money and go, look how much, I'm really solid with my elite colleagues. And it may just be incompetence as well. So there are a lot of articles going out there right now saying, we're living in a world where there are just a lot of people that don't know what they're doing. And that shareholders are okay with this, at least as a start. So we have investment firms like BlackRock that are forcing companies, essentially, so BlackRock and a couple of other hedge fund managers sort of control, some gargantuan share of the funds under investment, 60, 70%, something like that. And they seem to be very interested in making sure that companies follow these ESG rules. And so Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, they're saying, well, hey, if we're going to invest in you, you need to have sustainability this and DEI that, and all of these things that don't really seem to be about the business that the company's in. So we're just going to take these as a starting point. And the question that we want to ask is, well, as economists, if we put these into a model and just sort of assume these things up front, what does that look like? What happens when we do that? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start out with one economic model that's a partial equilibrium model, and then I'm going to go move to a general equilibrium model, and you'll see why. And I want to try to get at this. Why is this, when we sort of build these things into a model, what sorts of explanations do we get for what we might actually be seeing here today? So is it the case that these behaviors can just sort of continue to exist? Or is it the case that eventually the market sort of solved the problem? Okay, and I'm also, by the way, I'm very happy to take questions during the talk. So if you have a question, just either raise your hand or shout it out or whatever. I'm very, very happy with that. Okay, any questions? All good? Question?
Yeah, I recently heard something about Bob Iger from Disney saying that they have been taking things a bit far. Do you think there's any hope for Disney?
Well, I mean, I guess we'll see. I'm not an expert on Disney, but I know that Iger actually was responsible for a lot of this stuff, and now it's gone too far in his mind. So I don't know. Is he the guy that's going to fix it? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Kathleen Kennedy, because she's just wrecking everything over there. And maybe we'll have some insights from the analysis. Yeah. Well, no. So the problem is that you've got. Do you work, or are you full-time student, or So at some point you'll have retirement savings. So all of your retirement funds are managed by people like BlackRock. So they've got everybody's retirement money. So it's your money, and then they take this money and they say, well, if we're going to put you in our portfolio, so now you're the firm. If I'm going to put your firm into my portfolio, you need to have a high ESG rating, right? And so now as a firm, you're sort of going, hey, these guys lock up 70% of the money that's being invested, and they're telling me I've got to do ESG stuff. So I guess we better, hire Dylan Mulvaney or whatever and get our ESG score higher. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now also the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to present the math to the model. So I want you to see the logic of the thing. It's not really important, nobody's going to get tested on the math here, but I want to try to explain what's going on in the model so that you can see it, and don't worry too much about the math if you don't like it, but just try to follow the logic of how the thing is set up and what's going on. So the first thing that we're going to do is an overlapping generations model. And we're going to do this because we just said, well, one of the things we want to care about is parents who care about their kids. So an overlapping generations model, we've got a representative agent who lives for 2 periods. And so, let's see if there we go. So the representative agent lives for 2 periods. So born in period T, lives in period T plus 1, and then there's a new agent born in T plus 1. The agent's going to begin with just some endowment of wealth. That's what this is. So ET is just some endowment of wealth and some social status. So there's just some social status that's just some number in some range, let's say. And the utility of the agent that lives for 2 years is the consumption, so the utility of the consumption in period T, plus, this is a discount factor, the discounted value of consumption in T plus 1. So there's basically a net present value of consumption. And we've got a couple of budget constraints. So there's going to be 3 kinds of agents in this model. One is the agent, the representative agent. One is the college, which is going to provide education. And the other is the firm, which is going to provide production, maybe. So the first thing for the agent is that you've got to satisfy some budget constraints. So what this says is that the agent is going to consume. So the agent's born in period T and has some endowment. And what's the agent going to do with that endowment is going to consume some of it, spend something on education, and invest some in a firm. So that's what the agent gets to decide in period T. And then consumption in period T plus 1 is going to be a return. So this is the rate of return on the investment. So this is the return on the amount invested that comes back to them. So that can get consumed. And some new status, so we're going to assume that the status in period T plus 1 is a function of the status in period T plus education. So education is increasing status, is the idea. And the agent gets some sort of enjoyment from having high status. That's why this is entering into, is part of the consumption. So you're sort of consuming your status, you're enjoying your status, okay? And so what we can do when we do the usual stuff, which is we sort of do the budget constraints and maximize the agent utility, is we can get a equation for the amount of education demanded. So that's step one, is we want to see, well, how much education are these guys gonna consume? And this just says it's just gonna be the education that's demanded, demand for education, is some function of the amount of wealth that you start with, your initial status, and the return on investment. Okay, so pretty standard stuff. Now, what do colleges do? Well, colleges provide the education. So colleges, we're going to assume, just get some revenue, and the revenue is some function of the wealth in society. So we're going to assume that as wealth goes up, tuition goes up. And so the college is going to have net income, which is the revenue that they get minus the cost of providing that education, all right? And so when we put this together with the budget constraint that we had above, we're going to get a supply of education. So we're going to get a demand for education and a supply of education. And when we equate demand and supply, we get sort of the equilibrium level of education. And that's going to be a function of your endowment and the status that you begin with. Okay? So we've got some education that's going to be demanded. We also see that we've got an equilibrium level of status that's a function of the equilibrium level of education. And then last but not least, we've got firms. So what firms are going to do is what we assume they do. They're going to have some revenue, and this is going to be a function of how much capital they invest and the level of competition in society. But then they have to pay the people that give them the capital some return on their capital. And we're going to assume that having high status people destroys value. So this is at this point just an assumption. So having higher status people is just going to wreck value. Now, why can this happen in equilibrium? Well, because this is a partial equilibrium model. So this is important. This is not a general equilibrium model. So in this case, we're saying, well, there are firms who have this feature, and they're going to just sort of wreck value. Why might they be doing that? Well, there's shareholders like BlackRock and so forth want them to do it. They want high status. They want these sort of, if you will, woke managers managing their companies. So they're going to burn some extra value here. Now, when we do our profit maximization, we get the equilibrium return. So we get the equilibrium return, all right? So basically what we've set up here, and again, we've built a lot of this stuff, right? I said this is what we're going to assume. We just sort of built a lot of this stuff into the model, right? We just put it in here. And we haven't gotten to the markets should be working to put these guys out of business yet because it's a partial equilibrium model. And we're saying, well, suppose that this is what's going on and competition isn't putting these guys out of business necessarily. And what do those dynamics look like? And we get our equilibrium return on capital, we get our equilibrium level of education, and from that, we can do the dynamics. So what we have here is, so if you look at this chart, this is status in period T. So I am born in period T with some level of status, and then with all of the stuff that we've just calculated, we can tell you what my status will be in period T plus 1, and that's this blue curve. So what this is saying is, suppose that I wake up and I'm born in period T with a status level of 0.5, and I go, okay, at the end of all of these markets clearing and so forth, I'm going to have a status of 0.6, right? So that's what this says. So in the next period, I have 0.6, and the reason that we have this 45-degree line on here is that once I'm on 0.6, right, I can just come over here and say, and I can go, okay, so the dynamics are going to be like this. I start here, and then I'm going to be at 0.6, which I can just go to the 45-degree line. That's going to be, right, 0.6. That's in the next period, and then I'm going to have that status, and then I can go over here, and then I'm going to have that status, and so on. So this is basically a contraction mapping. So this is a stable, steady state. Where this curve intersects the 45-degree line, what that's saying is the status in period t equals the status in period t plus 1. And once you're in that state, everything just stays at that status level. So there is an equilibrium. And this is an equilibrium that, as I say, this is an attractive point. So wherever you start on here, eventually, after a certain amount of time, you wind up in that equilibrium. So, and we can do comparative statics. So we can say, well, you know, how does this line shift around depending upon these other parameters in the model and so forth. But it says, yeah, there's a steady state, and you get to a certain level of status and so on. The bad news is that in this model, you get to a steady state, and then at some point, all the capital gets used up because they're burning capital. The higher the status goes, the more capital you burn. So at the end of the day, this is just a drain on the economy. So if you have the things that we just described, the interesting news is there is an equilibrium, and there's a steady state, and you wreck the economy eventually. So you're sort of going along, and then, you know, eventually all the resources are gone, and you're living in Venezuela or something like that. Okay. Now you might say, so this is step one. So this is sort of the Peter Turchin, but from an economic point of view, right? Sort of doing it with economics instead of some sort of a, you know, predator and prey model. So it's a little bit better. But what you should say, if you're one of my Austrian colleagues or someone who believes in the magical power of markets, and I'm a very pro-market guy, so don't get me wrong, but you might say, yeah, so what? That was a partial equilibrium model. I mean, you know, okay, so if you assume that there's no other competition and there's only these firms that burn capital, sure, that's what would happen. That was an assumption. But what happens when there are competitive firms and competitive colleges? So there's Hillsdales and firms that stick to their knitting and do what they want to, you know, what they should be doing. They should just put those people out of business, right? They should just put them out of business. So that isn't necessarily a very convincing story. But in order to answer that question, and the question is, well, maybe that logic is correct, but, you know, maybe it isn't. So the proper tool here is a general equilibrium model, right? I want to have a model where there are productive firms and unproductive firms, and I want to see, is it the case that the unproductive firms eventually just get driven out of the market? So that's why this tool, that's why general equilibrium. So I know my Austrian economist colleagues, you know, you know, this is this neoclassical, you know, bad stuff. But the point is look, if you've got the situation where you can show in a general equilibrium model that this is stable, then if you want to start loosening those assumptions, so there's, you know, lots of rationality and all this other stuff going on in a general equilibrium model, it seems to me that the problem only gets worse, right? That's why I like showing this in a general equilibrium model. If you have all people that can see ahead and know what's going on, and the prices are all revealed, and, you know, you can define the utility functions and all of that good stuff, and you get this bad behavior, and then you go, well, now let's loosen those assumptions, and then, you know, then it seems to me that this is even more likely to be persistent, right? Even more likely to be, if you can't get rid of it in the general equilibrium case, I think you've got an argument that it's going to be hard to get rid of in a case where you loosen up some of those assumptions. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So now this is a much more involved model, but there's an insight here that I want to share with you, because it's the insight that I think the get woke, go broke crowd is not getting. And so there's an important insight here that I hope I can convince you is important. And I also want to say, so this is taken from some work by Ellickson and others in 2011 paper. They have several papers, but I think their initial one was 2011. That's really cool because it allows for firms that are discrete and finite. So as you may know, in a general equilibrium model, everything is sort of a continuum, and you know, there's an infinite number of firms and an infinite number of agents and so forth. But here they're going to really innovate in terms of defining the organizations themselves, and that'll allow us to have a model with colleges and firms and so forth in the model, which is unusual for a general equilibrium model. Okay, so how is this set up? So there's going to be two publicly traded goods, Y1 and Y2, and you can think of Y1 as money if you want, and Y2 as a consumption good. That's how we're thinking about it. And we're going to have four organization types explicitly put into the model. One is serious universities, Hillsdale, and elite universities, Harvard, okay? And you're going to have serious and elite firms. Serious firms, firms managed by Hillsdale graduates. Elite firms, firms managed by Harvard graduates, okay? Then some technical stuff. And then, so agents here also are going to begin with an endowment, and we're going to have prices. So, what we're going to have, and this is sort of the interesting part of this, as in any general equilibrium model, you've got prices for the divisible goods, but we're also going to have prices for membership in these organizations. And the prices are going to be the amount that you pay universities in tuition, and the amount that you get paid by your firm, all right? So they're going to be prices for membership. And then what's an equilibrium look like? Well, you're going to budget balance like we did before. Agents are going to have to make feasible choices, so in terms of their careers and memberships that they choose, they need to be feasible, and I'll show you that in a second. And then these choices, we're going to assume maximize utility. So at the end of the day, you're going to have, typical general equilibrium situation where you're going to identify equilibrium prices that sort of make all this stuff work. That's the idea. All right, so let's see what happens. All right, now I'm going to explain this, a lot of notation, but it's pretty straightforward. What this says is that a serious school, there has a role, and the role is student. So S stands for student. So there's a role that is required to have a school. Now, I don't have professors and other people like that. They just require someone to be a student. They're going to be designated by this designation S, and then this is the input-output function of the organization. So all organizations have an input-output function, and what this says is that the college requires you to pay tuition of R, so it's a cost. So you spend dollars, it's negative, so you spend dollars, and you don't get any consumption good out of it. You get an education out of it, all right? So the student gets educated. The elite school is the same thing. It requires a student. We'll make it an asterisk because it's special. It's a special elite school. So it requires one student, and we're going to add a multiplier that's greater than or equal to 1, meaning that it costs more to run an elite school. So you're either you're in downtown Boston, that's expensive real estate, you hire, expensive professors, you have all kinds of bells and whistles for the students or whatever. So we allow for the fact that the elite school can cost more. A serious firm is composed of a manager and 2 laborers. And so we'll make that an F. And what it does now is it consumes this input good and produces. So now we've got production happening. So that phi is just the amount of output that you get per minus C of input. And similarly, same thing for elite firms, only elite firms are going to require an elite manager. So that's the difference. And we're going to allow elite firms also we're going to have some parameters here that allow us to vary the cost of the elite firm and the productivity of the elite firm. Okay, so does that make sense? It's all good? All right. So these are the membership roles and characteristics of the 4 types of organization. Now, there's also memberships. So these are the things that are going to be traded in the economy. So if I want to be a student, then this is I get to be in the role of student in a serious university. G1 is the serious universities. Or I can be a student in an elite university. Or I can be a manager in a serious firm, or a laborer in a serious firm, or an elite manager in an elite firm, or a laborer in an elite firm. So these are the things that get traded in the economy. These are like goods. These are like products, okay? And what we do to control for these things is we have a feasibility, a description of the conditions for feasible memberships. So these are all available to the members of the economy. The other thing to keep in mind is that all the members of the economy starting out the same. So it's just uniform, everybody, nobody's elite automatically, so we're just all sort of the same at the beginning of time. And what this says is, look, you can have a list of memberships that you want to buy, provided that these conditions are met. And what are the conditions? Well, the conditions are, I can either be a student at a serious college or a student at a elite college. So this says that this is a counting function. It says it's 1 if I choose to be if I choose that membership, and it's 1 if I choose that membership, and these have to be less than or equal to 1. In other words, I can't go to both colleges. I can go to 0 colleges, or I can go to one of the 2 types of college. That makes sense? Then, once I've gone to college, I can either be, and it's the same kind of logic, I can either be a manager at a serious firm, a laborer at a serious firm, a manager at an elite firm, or a laborer at an elite firm. So again, I get to be one of these things. I can't be more than one. I get to have a vocation that is one of those things. Moreover, if I want to be a manager in a serious firm, I need a degree from a serious university. So the only way, so if I've chosen membership in the serious school, this is 1, and then that allows me to be a manager in a serious firm. And then the same thing here. If I want to be a manager in an elite firm, I need to have a degree from an elite university. You see how that works? Okay. So this is, again, just from a technical point of view, this is pretty cool for general equilibrium theory. It's not, this is, I think, a pretty innovative approach to these things. So what happens? Well, we need to say something about the utility. So we said everybody has the same utility, and let's have these vocational choices. One is, I just consume my endowment. I go live in my mom's basement, I take my endowment, I play Xbox and drink some beer, and so this is membership in nothing. Or I can be an elite manager, which requires me to go to an elite school and then become an elite manager. Or I can be a manager in a serious school, or I can be an uneducated laborer in a serious firm, or I can be an uneducated laborer in an elite firm. And here's what we're going to assume, is that the utility, remember, everybody has the same utility. We all start out the same, so we all have the same utility, right? And so the utility is a function of consumption. So these are the vocational choices. So my utility has to do with my vocational choice and the amount of the 2 goods that I consume, right? And so we're just going to sort of do, not explicit functions or anything, but we're going to say for a given level of good 1 and good 2, what do I like the best? I like doing nothing, I like not going to school, not working, just, give me the money, let me hit the lottery, and then I get to sit around and, have a life of leisure. Next, though, for that same level of income, consumption, I like being an elite manager. So being elite is something that we want to be and like to be. So that's sort of the next. So you see, we've assumed that these D's, these are just scalars, these are just numbers. And so the rank ordering of utility is just going down like this. So I like sitting around and just consuming my endowment, if that's possible. But if not, I like being an elite manager. And if not that, then I like being a manager. Then I like being a laborer in a serious firm. And what I hate the most, though, as being a laborer in an elite firm, right? Why? Well, because they're incompetent and, you know, they're making me have struggle sessions in front of all my colleagues and so forth, and it's just really not very pleasant. So that's the logic. So we're going to assume that this is what's driving utility, all right? And so what do we do? So given all of this setup, so we've got the memberships, we've got the utility, we've got the organizations. What happens is universities budget balance. So again, this is sort of a very standard kind of a thing, where this is the income that they receive, and this is the price, right? So this is priced, this is the price of an education at a serious firm, and there's some cost to provide the education, so we need this resource number one, and its price is P1. So this is the revenue for the serious university minus the cost, and they're going to budget balance, and the elite firms are going to budget balance. And the firms are going to budget balance. So the serious firm is going to, these Qs are going to be the prices of labor. So this is the price of a manager, this is the price of a laborer, and there are two of them. This is the revenue to the firm. This is them selling their output product at P2, and this is them having to pay a cost in terms of the input product at P1. And these are going to be wages. So these are actually going to be negative, but these are going to be the wages earned by managers and laborers. And then the same thing in the elite firm. And then we've got these extra parameters here to fiddle around with the productivity of the elite firm. Right, so standard budget balancing is going to happen. And then the market's going to clear, right? So this is key. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, look, there's an initial endowment of the Y1, the input product, and theta 0 is going to be the number of people who just choose to sit around. It's the share of the population that plays Xbox, consumes their endowment, and drinks beer, or whatever it is they're doing in their leisure time. Sigma 1 is the share of the population that works for a elite firm. So that's going to, of course, be split into 2/3 are going to be the laborers and 1/3 are going to be the managers, right? But that's the overall share of the population who's working at a elite firm in some capacity. And then, of course, Sigma 2 is the share of the population that's working in a serious firm. And so you've got laborers and managers. And then there's also the share of the population that's at an elite, that's an elite man, you know, that's these guys, the elite managers, they have to go to school. So there's going to be some amount of cost in terms of education resources, eating that up, and the same thing for the serious school. So the key thing here is to pay attention to Sigma 0, Sigma 1, and Sigma 2. Number of people doing nothing, just leisure. Number of people in an elite firm, share of the population, I should say percent, that's a percentage, and percentage of the population in the elite firms. And then, of course, these all need to add up to 1. Okay, so with all this stuff specified, the question that we want to know the answer to is this. Is there an equilibrium in which all of these are positive? You see, if that's the case, then we really have a problem, because the argument that, hey, you know, at some point, these productive firms and the productive colleges, they're going to put everybody else out of business, right? It can't be the case that you've got this big inefficiency happening. But if there's an equilibrium in which all of those are positive, then it says there is an equilibrium where, in fact, a bunch of people are doing this woke stuff. They're going to the college that isn't educating them. They're in firms that are burning up extra money. You know, and so you would think, no, there can't be an equilibrium. You know, that's got to be 0. But it isn't. There are actually prices here, which we can solve for, in which all of those parameters are positive. all the parameters are positive, meaning that, and here's the insight, right? So here's the insight I want you to see, is that what people aren't thinking about and what the general equilibrium model forces you to think about is what's being purchased. Membership in the elite class is a good. And the good news is, right, the good news is markets work, okay? There are prices that provide people the consumption of elite status. So if elite status is a membership that I can buy, and that's something I value, the market delivers prices that clear everything. Now, what's interesting is that what you're going to see here is, so there's basically the universities just break even, so they receive their costs, so the universities are operating at cost. But what's interesting here is this: the elite manager pays for the elite university education, and the wage, in this model anyway, for the elite manager is to reimburse their expensive college education. So in the data, you could see, oh my gosh, these elite managers are getting paid a ton of money, but they went to Harvard. They have to pay Harvard tuition, right? So basically, in the model's just saying, look, they just get back what they paid. They're not really making anything, although they do get to consume their elite status. Whereas the competent managers, they get reimbursed for their college education plus their productivity. What's interesting, of course, and somewhat humorous, I think, is that this model predicts that people working for Disney must be paid a lot more to work at Disney because it's so horrible, right? So nobody likes that. If you're a laborer, you're one of the writers for these shows, and they say, look, we want a young person sci-fi show that was really hard-hitting on capitalism, And you go, oh man, I got to get out of this firm, So these guys have to be paid a lot in order to induce them to do that, and then there's a wage for the laborers as well. Okay, so that's the insight. The insight is, and I won't spend any time on this. The insight is, yeah, markets work. You just need to understand what's being traded. The bad news is that we still have an economy that, where there's just a lot of value being flushed down the toilet, right? Now, again, it's value that people value their elite status, so you're sort of going, well, I don't know, it's what people want. But in terms of the production and their role in the firms, they are less productive than people that, than you guys will be when you go out. And there we go. So that was kind of a whirlwind, yeah.
Professor, I'm sorry, we have to leave for a minute, so I'm going to get it all in. But, become a serious college in this society, in this country, by giving up federal aid. Hence, Hillsdale and maybe a few others. Can you be a serious firm in this economy with the SEC making requirements for this, that, and the other thing?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And, I think that's an open question. So I'll tell you that I've been involved in some SEC policy groups, and the SEC, what's going on behind the scenes in terms of they are trying to make ESG the law of the land. So it isn't just going to be the BlackRocks of the world saying, hey, if you want your money, we need you to be woke and ESG and all this other stuff. But behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of rules that are in the works that look like they're going to be coming out, where the government is, basically going to force this. And in that world, I don't know what you do. So a Hillsdale can say, hey, we don't want your money, but what do you do when it's the law? Yeah. Thank you for that question.
So where have you presented?
So this is brand new work. So this was, and I should have said, given thanks to the American Institute for Economic Research. So I was there for 3 weeks. That's where this was developed. Presented it there, and I'd like to. We've got the results all written up. It needs to be put into a paper. So once that happens, then off we go.
I was just curious as to what the response would be.
Me too. Me too. So, we want to send it to a good journal, and we'll see whether that flies or not.
Just out of curiosity, I imagine
in the sense of,
One thing my colleagues and I that we've been talking about is that we think that the problem with that paper is that sort of assumes that all of this stuff has to be loaded up on the firm
yeah,
and that there are not other social institutions
okay,
meant to take care of that problem.
yeah.
And that
Oh, that's interesting. So I would love to talk to you some more about that, actually. I like that. That's a good take. Any other questions, concerns? Happy, unhappy? Make you feel good about being at Hillsdale? Yeah.
So stable general equilibrium. But is there a component of capital consumption or something like that in this that is
Yeah.
that eventually undermines the stability?
No, that's the point. So exactly. No, you've just, sorry. So maybe that wasn't clear, but that's exactly the point. So the capital, so the capital really in society is this E, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the endowment. And the thing is that the point of it is that what eventually happens is the economy crashes into the bridge abutment from this wasting of value. But the point is that in any given period, it isn't that sort of the serious firm dominates, right? Because the market's pricing everything. So this could, if you got to replenish this at some level every year magically, this would just go on and on and on. Eventually it can't, and eventually it stops. But the point is that it isn't, when you look at a general equilibrium thing, you might go, well, no, we're going to find that no one will go into this, that there's no equilibrium, right, where sigma 1 is positive. That would support these sort of markets work and make this go away. But what's happening is, at least there exist equilibria where that thing is positive, and that's sort of the problem. And so, but is it a problem? I mean, if people value status, the market's delivering status to them. It's just sort of costly, and I don't know. You guys all take philosophy classes, so I don't know what that's kind of a philosophical question. But at the end of the day, if that goes on for too long, the economy, people are poor. Yeah.
Wait, so what's the serious part to this? I mean, where are they going if the economy as a whole is crashing?
No, well, that's the problem. I mean, no, this is exactly so. So this is the general equilibrium piece. This is a one-period model. So this is just showing what happens in a period. But what happens dynamically is sort of this. So if these guys up here are wasting a whole bunch of resources, then dynamically, and we haven't done the dynamic version yet, but dynamically, what's going to happen according to the first model is this just keeps getting smaller and smaller every year. Well, I mean, we kind of are in the sense that we've assumed it's colleges, yeah. And the desire for status, right? And the desire, yeah.
So it sounds like we've been talking about this on an American level. Does it work on a local level or in other countries that say subsidize universities or have stronger socialized systems?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And here there's no government, right? So the government, there's no government involvement here, and that's obviously a huge issue. Yeah. Yeah.
That's all the time we have, but
Okay.
I encourage everyone who has additional questions to stay around. But for now, hand for Dr. Ryle.
Thank you. Thanks.